In Lesson 2 of Unit 2, we're going to deal with the leadership and the committees in the state legislature. It is no secret that holding formal leadership positions in any legislative body wields significant power. If you are a member of the leadership, you have a lot of power that you can wield and manipulate to accomplish the task at hand. But especially so in Texas, there is significant power in the leadership positions in both the House of Representatives and the Texas Senate. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is as we alluded to in the last lecture, is the individual that is responsible for running the Texas House of Representatives. Has enormous power. And we also talked about the Lieutenant Governor, who is actually part of the executive branch and elected to that position in a statewide race, but who sort of straddles the line between legislative and executive powers. He wields a significant amount of power in the Texas Senate. And so we're going to look at each one of these offices in depth as we move forward. So I said he actively presides in the Senate, but both are going to control significant legislative output from their respective chambers. So it's going to be essentially up to each one of these individuals to determine what bills get dealt with, what bills get passed, etc. And so we'll first turn to the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Texas. The Speaker of the House of Representatives in the state of Texas serves as the presiding officer and controls the passage of legislation. If it is not something that the Speaker of the House likes, then he's going to wield significant power over whether or not that gets passed or gets killed. The Speaker of the House is a regularly elected member of the House of Representatives. They don't run in a special statewide election or anything like that. They're elected from a House district in the state of Texas. And they are elected from within. They're elected by the majority of the House. So the House of Representatives will get together at the beginning of each session, and they will elect the Speaker of the House. And in this election, the Secretary of State of the state of Texas will preside and essentially ensure that the vote is fair, etc. But this individual, he will serve a 2-year term as the Speaker of the House in conjunction with his 2-year terms as a member of the House of Representatives. But this individual is also generally known in advance. So it's not likely that we're going to see a session begin where all the legislators get together and elect some off-the-wall candidate. It's no surprise as to who is going to be the Speaker of the House. Because prior to the legislative session, individuals who seek this position have to spend time lining up support from the different members of the House of Representatives. And if you remember, there are 150 members of the House of Representatives. And so they sort of have to spend time whipping up the vote and ensuring that they have enough votes to win this position. Now, they do this by visiting with all the different members of the House and lining up that support, but they cannot promise members a reward for their vote. So there can't be any tit for tat in this regard. There can't be I'll give you this position if you give me your vote. But key players that are important to this individual having enough support to win the election will often receive very plum assignments whenever the legislature begins, and so they might get a certain on a certain committee that they want to be on, or perhaps get a committee chairmanship that they seek. But it isn't done formally. There are no formal spoil system or reward system that occurs with whipping up the vote, and so the Speaker of the House must have all of his support lined up before the session begins, because he cannot spend time on the House floor or when the legislature is in session trying to secure votes. He must do it all beforehand. Speakers of the House tend to operate in a more bipartisan manner, and there's going to be, over time in Texas, we know that Texas has operated with a one-party system, with the Democrats since Reconstruction, and then since the early 90s, Republicans have controlled the office. But typically, we're going to see significant bipartisanship occur in the House of Representatives, and the Speaker will rely on members of the other party to win their speakership election sometimes, and even though the Republicans hold the majority in the House, we will oftentimes see Democratic chairpersons of different committees, and so there is a bipartisan manner that does occur in the House of Representatives. And in 2001, up until I believe 2001, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, and Democrat Pete Laney was the Speaker. And during this time, there was much more bipartisanship that was apparent in committee assignments and in the overall tone of the session. But in 2003, the Republicans are going to win the majority, and they're going to elect an individual named Tom Craddock, who is from Midland, and Tom Craddock will be elected to Speaker of the House. And under Tom Craddock's authority in the House of Representatives from 2003 to 2007, we're going to see less of a bipartisanship tone in the legislature. And so he's going to really run the House of Representatives with sort of an iron fist. Bipartisanship was not really something that he sought, and so this became apparent that Republicans and Craddock specifically didn't really seek out Democratic assistance in passing legislation. And so it's going to be a time period where this bipartisanship is sort of going to die, right? But in 2007, after that 2007 term session, there's going to be some backlash against Tom Craddock. Typically, incumbent speakers are reelected. If they choose to be reelected, if they choose to stand for reelection, they're reelection. But after that 2007 session, there was a movement known as the Anybody But Craddock movement, where Republicans and Democrats alike were seeking to eliminate Craddock as the leader of the House because things were less bipartisan in nature. And so there's going to be a new speaker that will be elected, and this individual's name was Joe Straus. And Joe Straus will be elected under this banner of Anybody But Craddock. So before the 2009 session even began, this long-standing Anybody But Craddock movement gained a lot of momentum, and it ultimately led to the election of Joe Straus. It was a move to oust Speaker Craddock beginning very early in January 2009, and a group of Republicans that were dubbed the Polo Road Gang of 11 moderate Republicans actually met at the home of Representative Byron Cook to discuss a challenge to the Speaker and to select an alternative candidate. Straus, who was a very moderate Republican, he was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2005. And in the movement for Anybody But Craddock, he will ultimately be chosen as sort of a compromise candidate to succeed Craddock in this role as Speaker of the House. And so it isn't common, excuse me, it isn't common to see somebody only serving in the House of Representatives for 4 years, to actually ascend to this role of Speaker. But because there were these special circumstances where they were trying to oust Tom Craddock, who, by the way, has been in office for like 50 years. I don't really know the exact number of years, but a very, very long time. But because there were some special circumstances, Joe Strauss was essentially utilized as a compromise candidate. And the Republicans barely, in 2008, barely held on to the majority in the Senate, or excuse me, in the House of Representatives. It was a 76-74 split. And so Strauss will be elected with the help of some moderate Republicans breaking from the leadership of Tom Craddock. Strauss will be elected. 65 Democrats are going to align with the Republicans to push Craddock out. And so because Craddock realizes he doesn't have the support, he will not seek re-election for the speakership. And so Joe Strauss will be elected to this role. And Strauss will hold this position as Speaker of the House up until this year. And this year is the first time in 10 years that we have actually had a race for a new Speaker of the House. And a new Speaker of the House is an individual named Dennis Bonnen, and he was elected in 2019. And you will be reading an article about Dennis Bonnen, and he's a very interesting case. He's been in the legislature since he was very young, in his early 20s. So he has ascended to that role of Speaker of the House, and seems to be a very able-bodied individual. So you will be reading a little bit more about that individual. But this office, the office of Speaker of the House, is actually believed to be the most powerful position in Texas government. It is one that comes with a lot of power. They have significant powers to direct and decide what legislation will pass the House. And they're going to gain a lot of their power from formal rules that are adopted at the beginning of each of the legislative sessions. And so this individual is Dennis Bonnen. He is our new Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 2019 legislative session. We'll probably be seeing more of him as we move forward into Texas history. But there are some significant powers that speakers are given in regards to what they can do during the session. One of the things that they can do is appoint all chairs to committees, and this is very important. Very powerful thing that they can do. And oftentimes we see not only people of their particular political party being appointed to chairs of committees, but they also do reach across the aisle at times and give Democrats some of those chairmanships. They can appoint most members to standing committees. They appoint members to the calendar, procedural committees, conference committees, and other special and interim committees. And they are the presiding officer over all sessions, which allows the Speaker to recognize members on the floor who want to speak. They get to essentially interpret the House rules, and they decide when a vote is taken, and if there is a vote by voice, they will decide the outcome of a voice vote. They also get to refer bills to committees, and as a rule, bills go to subject matter committees, but the Speaker has the discretion in deciding what committees will receive a bill. And so some speakers will some speakers have used the State Affairs Committee as their dead bill committee, and bills will get assigned to this committee that have little chance of really passing the legislature. And so the Speaker can assign a bill to a favorable committee to enhance its chances of passing, or assign it to a less favorable committee if they want that bill to be killed. So they do have enormous power in what kind of legislation comes out of the House of Representatives. So they essentially control the House agenda. Very few bills are going to pass the House without the Speaker's approval. Even if there is wide bipartisan support from both sides of the aisle. If the speaker is not on board with it, the speaker can influence whether or not it gets a hearing and whether or not it clears committee, and oftentimes the speaker can kill bills that they do not like. And so the speaker does have a significant amount of power in the House of Representatives. And so we turn our attention to the presiding officer of the Senate, which is the Lieutenant Governor. And unlike the Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor is actually elected in a statewide general election and serves a 4-year term. And so the Lieutenant Governor does not owe his or her election to the legislative body like the House Speaker of the House does. They are beholden to the general public, right? And so they will have to run for re-election every 4 years in a statewide election and be held responsible to the general public and the electors. And so they do serve a 4-year term. Now, even though they are, excuse me, head of this legislative branch or head of this legislative body, they are not formally a senator. And so they do not get the ability to vote in the Senate unless there is a tie, and then they will cast the tie-breaking vote. They are actually a part of the executive branch, and so they sort of straddle that line between executive and legislative branch of government, and they exercise power in both. Now, in most states, the lieutenant governor does not have legislative powers, but in Texas, this is different. They actually possess very similar powers to the Speaker of the House, and so there's going to be a lot of similarities in regards to the powers that each one of these individuals hold. Again, the lieutenant governor actually has the ability to appoint the chairs of all committees, select all members of all Senate committees, appoint members to conference committees, serve as the presiding officer of the Senate, which gives them the power to interpret the rules, and refers all bills to committees. And so these the ability to decide who gets on what committee and who chairs committees is going to be significant in a fight that has played out in 2019 between the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, and one of the senators from this region of the world known as Kel Seliger. And so you're actually going to read an article regarding this dispute between these two individuals, and you're going to determine, whether or not this was a breach of power by the lieutenant governor, or if he had the ability to really do what he did. And so there's going to be some inter-Republican, inter-party disputes between the lieutenant governor and a senator in regards to chairmanships and to Senate committees. So this is our current lieutenant governor. He is a powerful individual, but he has to balance power, and he is given his responsibilities and his rules by the Senate, and so the Senate actually has the ability to check his power if they see fit, if they think that he is wielding it too much, and so they can sort of take some of his powers away if they feel like he has not lived up to what he's supposed to live up to. And so at the beginning of each session, they will adopt rules that will allow this individual to govern. And so we're going to see, excuse me, the lieutenant governor having to align with some very powerful members of the Senate to actually exercise power fully. He cannot just step in and do everything he wants to do unchecked. He's going to be checked by individuals. And the current lieutenant governor is an individual named Dan Patrick, and he was just reelected in the 2018 elections, midterm elections, to another 4-year term. Now, even though they are part of the legislative branch, the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House actually have some extra legislative power, some responsibilities that they have to participate in or wield in those positions. They have powers outside of the legislature. They appoint members of state boards. And so state boards that we see across our state, part of the bureaucracy and things like that, they are these heads are going to be, or members of these boards are going to be appointed by these individuals. The Legislative Budget Board is is a group that writes state budgets, and they are going to appoint these individuals. They also serve on state boards. They are actually the chair and vice chair of the Legislative Budget Board. They serve on Legislative Redistricting Board, which is the board that will redraw House and Senate districts if the legislature fails to do so, which the legislature has failed to do so in Texas history over the past 100 years or so. So we will look at that in another lecture. This is a job that has significant power because it's only checked by court action. And so if the legislature doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then this Legislative Redistricting Board with the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor sitting on it will have significant power to redraw House and Senate districts. Now, we're going to turn our attention to committees in the legislature because most of the work in the legislature is done via standing committees. And so standing committees are committees that are established by House and Senate rules. They also have a bunch of different subcommittees that operate underneath these standing committees, but standing committees are established by House rules, and they're things that are typically seen session to session. We're going to see them in place all of the time. There are also conference committees, which are joint committees of the House and of the Senate that come together to work out differences in bills. Oftentimes we will see similar bills passed in each chamber, but they're not exactly the same. And so in order to be able to send that to the governor for his signature, they must pass in the exact same fashion, same manner, and have all of the same. They must be twin bills essentially, and so if they pass bills that are different, they'll go to a conference committee and they'll hammer out all the details, and then they will be sent on to the governor. Interim committees are temporary committees that study issues between regular sessions and make recommendations for legislation. So even though our legislature does not meet every single year, in those off years, those even-numbered years, we're going to see individuals participate in interim committees where they go about doing work of the legislature so that when the next legislative session comes around, they can make recommendations for certain legislation that might need to be passed. Of these committees, we're going to see standing committees be the most important. And standing committees, there are 14 standing committees in the Senate, and there are between 38 and 41 in the House. It just depends on which, what rules the House adopts for certain sessions. And there will be a list of these committees that you will be able to peruse at your leisure, linked to the Canvas. So feel free to look at those. But the chairs of these committees have similar powers to the Speaker of the House, but just at the committee level. So it's an instance where they preside over the committee. They hold all the powers that the Speaker has just at the committee level when they all get together. These committee chairs can often prevent bills they don't like from passing, so being a chair of a committee is an important thing and bears important responsibility. And so we'll see most of the work be done in these standing committees and then referred out to the respective legislative chamber to be voted on by the full House or the full Senate, but most of the legwork is going to be done at this level. And so we're going to leave off here, and we'll come back in our next lecture and look more in depth at some of this legislative portion of the Texas government.